Right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started. And of course, I hope you're looking at anticipation to Sunday. I am. We had over 170 people last week.
Amen.
That was, and we will have parking lot attendance this week. And we do have permission to use the lot over across the street. So I know we can get every bit of 15 cars, probably more. We got a lot more cars parked here last week had there been done decently in an order. So we're going to really kind of work on that. That's why with the parking lot attendees, and Larry will organize that to get the most out of it. Of course, particular week we're taking up a big of it with the tent. But Easter Sunday, this will all be open to make sure that we utilize every bit of our parking. We'll be fine if we do that. And then of course, later on in the business meeting, I'll talk about Plan B for our seating, which I had in mind when I did Plan A, because Plan A goes into Plan B. It's just a little bit more extensive for some, not for me, but for some. So we'll talk more about there. But yeah, things went very well Sunday, except for the issues. We were a little gridlocked, and then of course this Sunday we'll have baptism again, along with a dessert auction. So the tent will be sent up on Saturday. A gentleman from C&M Reynolds called me on Monday. He broke his ankle, so he's having surgery on Thursday to have a pin put in. So, of course, it's a family thing. His brother helps him, and his daughter and his wife, and so they set it up a little sooner, but they won't be doing it until Saturday morning. Portable toilets will be here Friday, so if you want to stop by, he'll be out there. Help yourself. And so everything seems to be coming together. The weather is going to be real borderline, so we're hoping for the best where that's concerned. And we have to build a campfire or something next to the sign. I don't know. We'll see what happens. So, all right. 2 Corinthians chapter 7. 2 Corinthians chapter 7, we'll be focusing on verses 2 through 7 tonight. And, it's not hard to convince anybody that life is full of pain and suffering. There's commercials about it all the time, right? People who are willing to come to your aid. And they don't expect any compensation. They get money for you. No, that's how that works. But anyway, a lot of pain and suffering. But what we're going to see tonight is the idea of converting trouble into joy. And I don't think you can do that apart from Jesus Christ. You really can't. I don't know how good you are at converting things. I know when I was in the second grade, I remember being told that when our class graduated high school, that the United States of America would be completely on the metric system. Yeah. Dropped the ball on that one, didn't they? Didn't even come close. But second grade, that's when they told us that was going to, they began teaching us all of the metric system to prepare us so that when we graduated and went out into the world, we would be well informed. And I don't know how well you are converting things. I'm thankful for a smartphone for that, because when I'm not sure how many spoonfuls equal certain other amounts of things, I find that out very quickly in that way of conversion. And some things are a little easier to convert than others. I still have a big hang up, like when we go out of the country, Celsius. I was a little concerned because the air conditioner in my room in Kenya was set at 20. I'm thinking, this is going to be like a refrigerator. It was not. But if you do the conversion, that's a comfortable temperature. The other thing, of course, is the currency. I never did figure out, in Nigeria, it's called the Naira. Hayden would always over-exaggerate it. And I was always wondering, too, when we went to check out of the hotel in Kaduna, our bill was like 27,000 naira, and I'm thinking, boy, I hope there's a real reduced rate, and it was. Kenya was pretty easy. It's the shilling, Kenyan shilling. All you got to do is really kind of, you can ballpark it, just move the decimal point, because 10,000 shillings is $10. So just, well, it's actually $8 and something if you want to get picky about it. But you know, I know when I was in Israel, the shekel, that's a tough one to convert. But thank God, again, you can download an app on your phone and you plug all that in real quick, and you can find out very quickly what the conversion is. And so, as I said, some conversions are easier than others, and I would think that the conversion of troubles to joy, I don't think there's an app for that, but there's a book for that, and that's where we're at tonight as we begin looking at these verses. 2 Corinthians 7, verses 2 through 7. Make room for us in your hearts. We wronged no one, we corrupted no one, we took advantage of no one. I do not speak to condemn you, for I have said before that you are in our hearts to die together and live together. Great is my confidence in you, great is my boasting. Half I am filled with comfort. I am overflowing with joy in all our affliction. That's the phrase of what we're studying tonight. Paul could say he is overflowing with joy in all our affliction. Verse 5, for even when we came to Macedonia, our flesh had no rest, but we were afflicted on every side, conflicts out, fears within. But God, who comforts the depressed, comforted us by the coming of Titus, not only by his coming, but also by the comfort with which he was comforted in you. That's talking about the church. And as he repeated to us, your longing, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more. So Paul talks about this conversion, the afflictions, the troubles into joy. And in reality, he says, when it was all over and done with, I rejoiced even more. We've been talking about the problems that Paul has had, particularly where the ministry in Corinth was. Because now Corinth had a lot of problems. We studied 1 Corinthians, and that highlights a multiple of different, and really what, through Paul's letter of correction to them, it has served the church as a format for correction down through the centuries as well. And hopefully it's preventative. It's, God forbid we have to visit some of those things that he dealt with in the church of Corinth, but some churches do. But we have the pattern of what we're supposed to do in that case. Now, of course, one of the things we've emphasized in this second letter was the idea that he was dealing with the fact that there were those who were trying to discredit his reputation. The Judaizers were the main source for that, coming in, perverting the gospel, saying that Paul had pure motives. He was doing it for, to benefit himself and all the rest, and just defend his character. And I'm sure that was very, very disturbing to him as well. And he uses this as an opportunity to display God's grace and power. And so what we're going to discover here is the secret of converting troubles to joy. First of all, let's talk about the source of troubles, the source of troubles. Now, we understand that when we read the individuals in the scriptures, it's not like reading, well, I don't even know if they still have comic books, but anyway, superheroes, the Old Testament patriarchs, the New Testament saints, they're not superheroes. I think it's interesting that the New Testament commentary on Elijah says that he was a man of like passion. What does that mean? It means he's human like everybody else. I mean, here was a man who stood against 900 prophets of Baal in the power of God successfully, but then at the threat of one woman ran for his life and was depressed, saying, you know what, God, there's nobody left me. Well, sometimes we feel that way. We talked about that Sunday morning, me, myself, and God. That's where Elijah was. But God comes to him. He meets his need. And much like what we're going to see in regards to the source of Paul's troubles, Elijah was tired. He was kind of internalizing the threats against him. But God met those needs. God strengthened him in those times of trouble. But these are real people with real challenges, and sometimes they have very real problems. And, you know, if the Bible was written like a superhero comic book, somebody might have an Achilles heel to some degree, like, you know, Superman has kryptonite. But the case here is the idea that they are just human beings who God empowers to do extraordinary things. But we can identify with them very rightly. And so that's what we want to get when we look at these biblical characters. They're flesh and blood, just like everyone else. And so we want to make sure that we don't buy into the myth. Now, place there, but if you go back to 2 Corinthians 6, we have already mentioned some of Paul's perils in verses 4 through 10. He says, in everything, commending ourselves as servants of God in much endurance and afflictions, hardships and distress and beatings, imprisonments and tumults and labors, sleeplessness and hunger, in purity and knowledge, patience and kindness, in the Holy Spirit, genuine love, in the word of truth, the power of God, by the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and to the left, by glory and dishonor, by evil report and good report, regarded as deceivers and yet true, unknown yet well known, as dying yet behold we live, punished yet not put to death, as sorrowful yet always rejoicing. There's that conversion portion of it. As poor yet making many rich, as having nothing yet possessing all things. And so again, that's kind of a summary of this back and forth of the kind of things that he was up against in regards to the ministry there to the Corinthians. And so we'll look at 4 different sources of trouble, and I will all find them very applicable to our own lives as well. The first is physical fatigue. Verse 5, our flesh had no rest. Sometimes, you know, physical fatigue can make us weak mentally. It can break us down. I don't know. I came through an era of fundamentalism where it seemed like they thought that to just drive you to a point of where you were physically exhausted was somehow more spiritual, and that you were more in touch with God. No, you couldn't think straight. It wasn't good at all. I love Christ in Life Ministries and Harold Vaughn and the prayer advances, but the first one I went to wasn't the best experience, and it wasn't Harold Vaughn's fault, believe me. It was a group I traveled with. At that time, they weren't doing it at the church where you guys meet. It used to be at a campground, a beautiful campground, but 20 guys slept in one thing, you know, with the snoring and everything. Oh my goodness, it was brutal. But I had been invited at the last minute because someone had backed out and there was a space. And so I taught on a Wednesday night, and then I had to drive 2 hours, good 2 hours, to get to where I was going, to where we were going to leave in the morning. So I didn't get to where I was going till 11 o'clock at night, and then we were leaving the church at 4 a.m. to drive down to Roanoke. And then we got there, and of course, then the meeting started and everything like that. And then the first night, you know, after the one who was leading our group said, well, we're going to have a prayer. So they took out a drawer from the dresser and said, this is going to be our altar. We're just going to pray here all night. And it was like 3 a.m, you know. And again, by the next morning, I couldn't have told you what my name was. And then, you know, sitting in the meeting, and then they wanted us to go find a quiet place to pray on our own. I couldn't stay awake. By the time the weekend was over, because even by the time I got back to the church I went with, I still had a 2-hour drive back here. I couldn't remember anything about that weekend, and I was messed up. And I don't think, man, there's not much spiritual about this, because you get so physically exhausted, sometimes the best thing you can do when you're overwhelmed is just back and rest a while. Because if you're that physically fatigued, it's not going to help you at all. And some of you are familiar with the great football coach Vince Lombardi said that fatigue is cowards of us all. And we get sometimes like what when I drove truck, there was a fellow from the Salem area. His name was Billy Bell. He used to tell me that he was tarred. I said, "You were what?" Tarred? Was there feathers involved? No, not tarred. Tarred. I said, "Okay, I'm just tarred." And there were many times we were tarred. We would get these runs of loads out of Millville and Salem going up to Newark, New Jersey. And for 3 days, just as many as you could do. Just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And by the third day, you'd be driving along and you stop the truck for a minute to remember where you're going. And it was tough. We were tarred. So physical fatigue, that can be a source of trouble. There's certainly personal attacks. He wrote that we were afflicted, literally troubled on every side. And when Paul, I think he's talking about those who quickly and viciously opposed him. And, I know we're supposed to take the attitude, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. There's times when I wish people would just hit me with sticks and stones, because the words can drive you around. And you think, oh, that doesn't bother me. Then you're thinking about it. and you realize you are. And the reality is sometimes it sets very heavy on us, on these personal attacks. Abraham Lincoln was always the source of criticism throughout his life and his presidency. And he had a good sense of humor about a lot of things. One time somebody accused him of being two-faced. And he said, if I had two-faced, he says, you think I'd be wearing this one? Because he certainly wasn't the most handsome man, especially towards the end of his life. But here's a quote in response to some of his critics. He said, I care to listen to every criticism, let alone act on them, then the shop may be well closed for all other business. I have learned to do my best. If the end result is good, then I do not care for any criticism, but if the end result is not good, then even the praise of angels would not make any difference. And boy, you really have to do that. Now, I've learned, there's an example in David's life. Remember when David got run out of the kingdom by his own son? And there was this guy throwing dirt at him on his way out of the city, and cursing David, you're a man of blood. And of course, Joab, David's general, said, I'll take care of him. I'll go over it. It's done. He said, no, leave him alone. Why? David just took to heart. He thought, and just kind of thought about what the man was saying and thought, well, is it true? And if it is true, what action do I need to take? And that's really how you have to learn to handle criticism is, number one, weigh the difference and say, well, is there some truth to it? And if there is, what can I make in order to meet the truth of the criticism? But then you need to sift it through and find out which part of it is nothing and let it go. And a lot of times it's a matter of considering the source from which it came. Here's the big thing in history. I've had this happen a long time, and I hope by saying it doesn't happen again. Everybody's upset with this. Nobody will do that. Well, who's everybody? And I confronted that one time in that situation. I said, who's that? Start listening. Oh, well, I can't do that. I said, you can't do it because there isn't everybody, and nobody knows what you're talking about. And that's exactly what it came down to. I'm talking about they, everybody, nobody. If they can't be specific about where the source is, most likely it's just something you ought to just let go. The other thing is outward conflicts. And that's what he talks about in verse 5 when he says conflicts without. The word can be translated fightings. This phrase applies to troubling circumstances which over we have no control. Which we have no control. This week, I've been constantly reminded. I was waiting to cross that threshold where I could see the 10-day forecast, where it got to next Sunday. I have no control over the weather. You know, neither do the people who tell me what they think it's going to be, 5 days from now. But nonetheless, I'll tell you the other thing I don't have any control over is other people's behavior. I really don't. And so life is full of outward conflicts over which we have no control. And as someone has well said, is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And that's often true. And then, of course, there's inward fears. He says here, fears within. Again, verse 5. We talked a little bit about this in our study of the 23rd Psalm. Fear can paralyze you. Probably one of the most familiar portions of the speech that was given by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933 at the height of the Great Depression was when he said, "This great nation will endure as it has endured, revive and will prosper." So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And most people stop there, but there's more to it. He says, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. He says, what happened is, we're so enamored with, of course, the financial crisis that our country was in. He says, you become paralyzed, and so what? We're not forging a path forward in these things. And so that's what we have to be careful of. And there are other things to fear rather than fear. And I think fear is one of the devil's greatest ploys. He knows that he can inject that, and probably talked about this acrostic in the past for fear, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. And as you look at the checklist, you can relate to some of the troubles that he faced. And then he talks about these troubles can be converted to joy. So that's the second thing, the secret of joy. After mentioning these troubles, Paul wrote, I am overflowing with joy in all our afflictions. Verse 4, and this idea of conversion. And then verse 6, he says, but God, who comforts the depressed, comforts us. Again, Paul's not a superhero, not by any means, with superpowers. He was just a follower of Jesus who discovered the supernatural power of God. And the secret to converting your troubles into joy is found in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. There's no other means. It has to come from that. And so I believe Paul had discovered 4 dimensions of the secret of having this unbounded joy in the midst of unbearable trouble. The first one is turn to God first in trouble. Turn to God first when you're in trouble. I'll go back to chapter 1 of 2 Corinthians, because it all ties together. The 2 Corinthians chapter 1, and beginning in verse 3, just verse 3 and 4, he says, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father's mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our afflictions, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. I talked about Sunday about the overflowing cup, remember? That's a representative of the blessings that God gives us. It's not just He gives us what we need just when we need it, but He always gives us more than we need. And why does He give us more than we need? Not so that we can boast in ourselves, but we boast in Him. And so He blesses us so we can be a blessing. He comforts us so that we can be a comforter. I've never seen it yet to where if somebody was dealing with something or going through something, that I could find somebody connected to our church that hadn't gone through the same thing. Many times it may not be me, and so I'm going to try to just bluff my way through that. If I haven't personally been through that, I'm not going to pretend I have. But it's better if I can point them to somebody who has had that firsthand experience. And he recognized God as the only reliable source of comfort and strength in times of trouble. And I mean, you've heard people come to that aspect of saying, well, I guess there's nothing left we can do but pray. Really? Maybe we should have been doing that in the first place, you know? But it's easy to fall in that sometimes, right? It is. That's human nature. We do everything we can. You know, we try to breathe life in barbecued pig. I don't know how many VBS kickoff things we tried so we could get people registered early, and it never worked. Didn't keep us from trying. Not that we weren't praying, but you know. So I'll tell you what, though, online registration is the way to go. That's the way people do things now, and so it works a lot better. But this idea, before we do anything, we need to pray first. Not last. It's not your last resort. It's your first resource. And if we miss that aspect of it, we're going to upend ourselves in regards to this. And I fear, you know, that we sometimes get ourselves in trouble because of that. You know, it's just like, well, this used to be a good illustration. I don't know how good it is now. It doesn't apply to my truck. Vehicles used to have a spare tire. Most vehicles had a full-size spare tire. If you ever driven one of those little donuts, being an experience. I was down in Jacksonville one year. Brandon and I drove to Jacksonville. My brother Greg and Cindy, they drove down too. And the next morning he called and we were in the same hotel. He said, "Hey, you got a flat tire?" I said, "Oh, what a great way to start the day out." So it was a front tire. So I took it off and then I looked to see where the nearest tire shop was. Well, I had to go one exit down 95 in Jacksonville. It was terrifying with that little donut on the front. I see people driving all around Bridgeton Millville. That's all they have. They got 4 of those. That's their main source of tire. But a lot of cars don't even have spare tires. And my Kia doesn't have one. It does either. And there's supposed to be some sort of magical thing that I wouldn't know how to use. I'd be stuck. I got AAA, so I don't worry about it. Remember one time, we had a Ford Taurus station wagon. That was a good car. My daughter wrecked it. One of many. Brenda was over near the Target parking lot one time, flat tire, and I said, "Well, that's what we got AAA for." I forget where I was. I said, "Call him." He came there and I said, "How'd things go?" She said, "Well, he towed the car back to the house." I said, "We towed the car?" She said, "He couldn't find the spare tire." I said, "You mean he didn't open the hatch there and that tire-shaped thing in the corner there? He didn't think to look there because that little half moon in the back, yeah, that's a tire, you know." So God help us. It still didn't cost me anything, but I still had to have somebody come and fix a tire. But you know, how often do we check the spare tire, right, to see if we even have one? You know, when I take my camper out, I check the air pressure and all the tires. I check it, and I got a spare tire. Make sure that's checked. That's the truck driver in me. You know, I'm just going for the day. I take a set of chains. I've got flares. That's just the way we do it. But, you know, we usually don't check that stuff until we need it. Then all of a sudden, you know, but again, the truck driver in me, that was part of your preaching. Make sure you had triangles, made sure you had road flares, you had, you know, and a spare tire and all this kind of stuff. But most people don't even think about that until they get a flat tire. That's the way a lot of people navigate their Christian life. You know, it's like, okay, God, I got this, you know, and I know you're there in case you see. That's not the kind of relationship we're supposed to have with him. Not by any means. We're supposed to be in constant communication. And what a difference that would make. And I read not long ago from Psalm 46:1, God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. he's not just, a spare tire holder thing. No. Well, that's did you guys had a minivan one time, didn't you? Yeah, of course you did. That's, I remember the first minivan I had, and I needed to get, they had a size spare tire. I couldn't figure out how it was suspended underneath the car. And we're looking under there. And it's like cables holding it up there, and there's this big thing. My dad is ready to cut it with a torch. Yeah, there's just something not right about it. I said, "What, Dad? Let me read the book here." And that's when I found out inside there's that little bolt. Put the thing on it, and the tire just comes down like this. I said, "Oh, man, Dad was ready to cut that thing off." He's old school. I didn't know until I needed it. You see. We don't want to be that way with God. He is an ever-present right now, and so turn to Him first, not just when things get really bad and you run out of options. Secondly, look for joy in the midst of trouble. Look for joy in the midst of trouble. You think you only have joy after you pass through your time of trouble. You're missing out on some of it. You're not being all of it. Listen to the words of Psalm 94. Psalm 94 is 18 and 19. It says, when I said, David's talking, he says, my foot is slipping. Your love, O Lord, supported me. When anxiety was great within me, your counsel brought joy to my soul. He didn't say after my foot slipped, after this happened. He said, no, in the midst of it happening. God, you were right there. And so we need to look at it from that perspective. And the thing is, it's easy in those times to focus on the trouble more than the joy. As we conclude our study of the 23rd Psalm Sunday morning, part of what's happened to that last verse is connection to Romans 8:28, which, things work together for good. Not everything is good, but the ultimate outcome. But we need to have that perspective of eternity, you see, when we're dealing with these things. In other words, trouble is inevitable, but the misery is optional. And of course, for some people, that's just their spiritual gift. I'm pretty sure. Misery, right? Then misery loves company. Then we got a real problem. But we do that. So instead of looking for trouble, we should look for joy. A fascinating short poem entitled Trouble by David Keppel. He said, never trouble until trouble troubles you. For you own your trouble double trouble when you do. And the trouble, like a bubble that you're troubling about, may be nothing but with a rim rubbed out. So there's nothing really to it. And President Theodore Roosevelt once was one of the most positive individuals that ever occupied the White House, and he said this. He said, when you see trouble coming down the road at you, 9 times out of 10 it will run into a ditch before it gets to you, so why bother with it? He's right. Most of the things we worry about never happen, and I know that. Doesn't keep me from worrying sometimes. I think about that sometimes. Thirdly, rely on godly friends to strengthen you. Back in 2 Corinthians 7, verse 6, but God, who comforted the depressed, comforted us by the coming of Titus. There's some people just show up and glad to see you. One of the times I was going up to camp, summer camp. And this will be, I think, 23 years going up to summer camp. We had just forged a partnership with Stephen Bahago. And he had never been to the States. Word of Life that summer brought him and Egla and the kids to the States for the first time. And they were up at Word of Life. We were preparing to go up to Word of Life summer camp, and that week, Sophie Pierce passed away. And so her funeral was going to be on Saturday. So I found some volunteers to drive the van up with the kids, and then Saturday at night, I drove up, and then they drove my car back home on Sunday for me. So I stayed home. I did the funeral, and then I drove up to camp that night. And that's when we used to go Saturday to Saturday. Boy, Sunday to Sunday, you say, oh, it's only 1 day difference. It is a huge difference, let me tell you. But at the end, they used to have concerts on Saturday night. We saw some great, a lot of Southern gospel groups were there, Legacy 5 and various other ones we saw while we were there. So anyway, after the funeral, I got on my way, and so I got up there, I don't know, it was probably 7, 8 o'clock Saturday night. And I parked then, and the concert was going on, so I'm going across the parking lot and coming the opposite direction. Here was Stephen Bahama, and he came over, and he just embraced me, and he hugged me. He said, Pastor, he's so glad to see you. He said, since I've been here, he said, I felt so strange and just so far from home. He says, but I feel like I'm home again. And I've never, but that's just a connection that you have with people that are believers, and you just, because, I met Stephen while we were in Nigeria, and him and Hayden were very close. And Stephen's a great man, a really great man. Him and his family still doing great work under great persecution and trouble, more than we could even begin to imagine. But this idea of friends that will strengthen you. And I remember somebody telling me one time that God always works through human instrumentality. We know God's there, but it's good sometimes if you got an embrace of something, you can just grab a hold of. I am so thankful, deeply, for the relationship that I have with Royce Williams. And now I know when we go down to men's conference, Royce is on staff there. Staff is very busy at the church, to say the least, right? And so forth. And usually when I'm talking to Royce somewhere in the lobby, and just everyone going by, hey, brother, hey, and they're just, man, I want to talk to Royce. I thought, man, that's great. So I just take my turn. I don't want to, but we were there, and Saturday morning, the second session, because he sat with me. And there was an empty seat alongside me, and he just sat with me for those two sessions. And when they got the invitation, Royce being on staff, stand down front at the altar, and he leaned over to me and he said, brother, he said, I don't know if I'll get to say goodbye to you. He said, so I'm going to tell you. And he says, and we'll stay until we will. And the closeness of it, when you have somebody like that in your life, and then there's times when I've had to reach out, because I know that he'll give me an impartial counsel. If I'm wrong, he'll tell me I'm wrong. And that's the kind of person that I need in my life. But he'll tell me I'm wrong with love. I think that's one of the reasons why Nathan was chosen. Nathan mentored David as he grew up, and Nathan was the man. Wasn't somebody who would have taken great pride in pointing out David's sin. But I think that Nathan was as brokenhearted over it as David was. And you need people like that in your life. You really do. And Proverbs 8:24 says, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend that's a brother. And you may have heard the statement, friend that walks in when everybody else walks out. They're there for you. You have a lot of acquaintances in life, but who are your friends? Who are the people? And I'll tell you what, it shakes down. Don't tell them to count those folks up. Now, that's not taking away from the great acquaintances that you make, and that's what's so silly about all those people. They think they've got hundreds of friends because it's on Facebook. I get requests all the time from people I have no idea who they are. So I look to see whose friend they are, and they're a friend of a friend of a friend of a person I don't even know. So it's like, no, I'm sorry, can't do that. Of course, you go on a missions trip. I get all these requests from Kenya, and I see, they're friends with Pastor Danny, or they're friends of a friend of Pastor Danny. I think, I gotta be selective here. I'm not sure, that I met while I was there. That's a little different. I have several of those who are just. Jimmy James is one of them. What a guy he is. Mike James calls him the selfie king, because he does. He takes great selfies. So he's studying for ministry, and he's really a good guy in the Lord. And there's a fellow by the name of John Ogden. Man, what a committed Christian he is. He was involved with us in DBS. He plays in the praise band. He just is all around. He's just involved in doing that. I was more glad to accept a friend request from him. But I mean the close friends. I mean the really close friends. And I'll tell you, in ministry, a lot of times, it's the people who tell you that they are self-declared best friends are the ones you want to watch out for. I don't even know where most of those people are anymore, you know. Because I had them tell me, and this should have been a red flag. Why would you even talk to me like this about my brothers? You know, well, I've heard your brothers preach, and I just think you're better than both of them. And I'm thinking, no, I'm different than the other two. I said, I'm not better than either one of them. I said, why would you even say that to me? You know, it reminds me of the words of Ben Rogers when he talked about somebody's complimenting you. He says, it's kind of like perfume. It might smell nice, but it'll kill you if you drink it. You gotta be discerning when it comes to that kind of stuff. But thank God for the friends that strengthen you, that come along and strengthen you. And we're such a tight network of men, and I think the Bible study is just bringing that even tighter. I love being with those guys on those Sunday nights, and be praying for Brother George. He might be watching even tonight. He's still pushing through a lot of pain, so he hasn't got that whole thing figured out yet. But I've certainly reached out to him this week. And why? Because we're friends. That's why, you know. And, I'm thankful for the friendships God brought in my life. I was thinking about this the other day. Oh, I know why. I was trying to think of why I was thinking about it. Sunday nights, while the girls were getting their baths, they switch off watching TV with me while the other ones get their bath. And we usually like watch food shows. Sometimes Bizarre Food with Anthony Zimmer. I can only watch so much of that because that guy would eat a buzzard off a gut wagon. Guy Fieri, Diners, Dive-Ins, and Dives. He was in Savannah, Georgia. And I'm thinking, man, go down there for a week and just eat. You know, I think some of the best to eat are in Savannah, Georgia. And those years that I flew down to Jacksonville early for conference and went out and visited with you too, what a great time that was. But I remember one time, I don't know if it was the first time after you moved down there, but I'll tell you what George and Betty Ann did. I was at conference, my brother Greg was there. They drove from Savannah all the way to the hotel where we only got to spend a couple hours together. And then they spent more time driving to Jacksonville and back than we had to spend together. But I wouldn't a couple hours we had for the whole trip that I had. What is that? That's deep friendship right there. Yeah, that is. And it just, that's where you find it. And those kinds of things. And then the other time, to drive up and spend a couple of days in Savannah. Oh, by the way, who was it? I don't know who told me now. Oh, I think it was Pete. Figures this come from Pete. He said, you got to get George. We'll start parking cars up at the school and we can shuttle them down here. I said, up in Pennsville, if you go up Pennsville on 49, before you get to Hook Road, they got some of them trolleys for sale. We need to buy us a trolley. You can memorize the history of the Presbyterian Church and the school, and just give them the whole gamut. You wouldn't even have to memorize it. You've lived it, you know it. And I thought, wouldn't that be cool? We had a bus. That didn't work. Done that, been there. But yeah, wouldn't that be cool? Go get one of them trolleys, the Cedarville Baptist on the side of it. You park up to school, man. We'll give you a trolley ride. Or we do like rough and tumble in the summer. You park out in the hayfield and you get a trolley. Not quite the same. The trolley thing was pretty cool, though. I did enjoy that. That was really neat. So anyway, not there too long. Let's move on. Letter D, stay connected to your church family. Stay connected to your church. You know, it's amazing to me, people, they get all uptight and they with their trouble and they've isolated themselves from the fellowship of the church. That's the worst thing you can do. The worst thing you can do. I mean, there's one guy, he was here a lot when things were going bad in his life, and then, then things started going pretty good for him. I didn't see him anymore. And then I crossed paths with him, and it was like, oh, did you forget my address? I said, well, what about to the church, man? I didn't see you there either. What about that? You're isolating yourself from the things that are most if you do that. 2 Corinthians 7:4, he says, great is my confidence in you. Great my boasting on your behalf. He's talking about the assembly, the church at Corinth. And then you see the next words, I am overflowing with joy in our affliction. Hopefully the church would be that place like home on the range, right? Where seldom is heard a discouraging word. Hopefully Sunday, the skies will not be cloudy all day. That should be the description of the church. Of course, most of you are familiar with Hebrews 10:25, not foreseeing our own assembling together as a habit of some. It's been a thing for centuries, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see them drawing near. And we need to be encouraging one another. The word gospel is good news, and we ought to embrace that in each other's presence. I need encouraging, you need encouraging. And, that's one of the things with this kind of movement we see going on in our church right now. And I'm excited about this Sunday. I'm excited about Easter Sunday. I'm delirious for the Sunday after Easter. That's the one I want to see. But the excitement. People are excited about what's happening. I know man would be put out by what's going on here. They really would. George, somebody sat in your seat, man. Right? You've been a victim of that yourself, though, right? Yeah. You sat in somebody's seat. Yeah, I mean, but we got people. I had somebody come to me Sunday and said, talking about making a move to the mezzanine. I said, well, I really need a few more people to make their way up there until we can get this Plan B thing I'm talking about implemented, which I hope within the next couple of months. And, but because there are 14 more seats. 14, pretty good, huh? We've already 21. We can add 14 more to it. And nobody has to sit up in here. And you always got a dead row because no sit on the front. That's why the junior church kids, somebody's going to have to eventually. And they're going to be softer seats, so hopefully we'll get somebody to move into them. But anyway, to be encouraging to people is extremely important. So, conclusion. Amazing thing about God's power, He can convert our troubles into joy. When the world does its worst to us, that's when God does His best for us. We know that's the reality of it. And so John wrote these words, John 16:33. John 16:33. These things I have spoken to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world, you will have tribulation. But I have overcome the world. So we want to get that perspective and understand that God is capable of controlling us into joy. All right, let's pray. Thank you for the time we've had to study tonight. And God, we thank you that even in the midst of what is common, no one's exempt. We know that. And seems like we can spend time counting our troubles than counting our blessings. And Lord, they can be converted. It's not that they're minimized, not by any means. We have a high priest, the Bible says, you are a high priest who sympathizes with us. Now, there wasn't any degree of trouble that we faced that you didn't experience while you were here on earth. But the victory over the grave, you've also given us victory over the world. And so, God, we thank you. God, may we rely on what we know to be true. May prayer always be our first resource, never our last resort. God, thank you for the deep, deep friendships that you bring into our lives. God, thank you for the community of the church where we can encourage one another. And God, continue to guide us in these wonderful truths, we ask in Jesus' name.